Leader of the UKIP Group, Neil Hamilton.
I agree absolutely 100% with everything that the Leader of Plaid Cymru has just said. And there are occasions when UKIP can be ecumenical. In the interest of the Welsh people, this is one of them. And it's something which perhaps we can follow up in the Public Accounts Committee, if not in a public inquiry, if that be not granted. But I want to ask about the First Minister's forthcoming meeting with Michel Barnier, the EU chief negotiator on Brexit, which I understand is happening on Thursday. Is he going to use this opportunity to complement the UK government's negotiating strategy, or to seek to undermine it? I believe that the First Minister accepts that we are going to leave the single market, and the government has said it is going to leave the customs union. That is something which I don't believe to be negotiable. I read that he is going to say to Michel Barnier that it's vital in the interests of Welsh jobs that we remain, if not members of the single market, at least with full frictionless access to it. But does he not accept that when you go into a negotiation, like Michel Barnier himself, you should play hardball, not softball? If you go into a negotiation accepting the fundamental tenets of the other side's arguments, then you're not likely to get the deal that you want, but a worse one. So what he should explain to Michel Barnier on Thursday is the advantages of mutuality here, both to the Europeans and to the British, of having the maximum possible free trade between us. And simply using this as an opportunity to grandstand against the negotiating strategy of the UK government is likely to fail anyway, but will also do the Welsh government no good in its dealings with the UK government at home.
Well, I'm grateful for his display of telepathy telling me what I'm going to say on Thursday. I'm grateful for his advice on that. I can say to him, I'm not going there to negotiate. I'm going there to explain the position that we have taken as a government in our white paper agreed with Plaid Cymru. And our position is very clear publicly that whilst we are leaving the EU, the terms upon which we leave the EU are hugely important. As with regards undermining the UK's negotiating strategy, I have no idea what that is. And until we have a better idea what the UK government's own view on these things, rather than different voices, Boris Johnson again today, Michael Gove saying something different, David Davis saying something different, the Prime Minister saying something that she's repeated several times over that she's seen on a piece of paper, we need to know what the position of the UK government actually is. We don't know that.
The First Minister is obfuscating here. He knows perfectly well that the aim of the UK government is the same as the aim of the Welsh government, and that is to achieve the maximum possible degree of free trade between the UK and the EU. But this is a reciprocal process. And if we are not granted free trade to Europe, we will not grant the EU free trade with us. And given that they have a trade deficit of £61 billion a year with us, it's as much in their interests as it is in ours, as it is in trade worldwide, that we reduce barriers to the free exchange of goods and services. So if he uses this opportunity on Thursday to reinforce that message, he may do himself a bit of good with the UK government by going with the grain. I wholly agree with what he said earlier on about DEFRA ministers not meeting with Welsh ministers. I do believe that was disrespectful and unhelpful. But it may be that the attitude of the UK government towards the Welsh government is informed by the approach which he and his colleagues have taken to the Brexit negotiations. They may think, what is the point of meeting with them, because they're only going to disagree with us.
Well, the Prime Minister went into the general election on the basis of obtaining a mandate to leave the single market, leave the customs union and leave the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. On each of those points, she failed. She failed. The British people did not support that view. And so now it's incumbent on us to find a way that provides the greatest level of consensus. Yes, we're leaving. Yes, nobody wants WTO rules to apply, but they will apply unless there is at least a transitional period, because there's not going to be a deal by March 2019. Nobody surely can believe that, given I've spoken to trade negotiators, and they'd say to me it takes 18 months to agree on what you're going to talk about, let alone getting a deal. These things are by nature very, very complicated. So it is hugely important that we look at transitional arrangements. We've put forward our view. It's in a white paper. It's very clear whether people agree with it or not. At least people can see that it's there. I have no idea what the UK government's current position now is. That's in no one's interests. And it's hugely important that they work with the devolved administrations to get there. We don't start from a position of trying to undermine the UK government. We will be vocal publicly if we disagree with what they're saying, but that's not where we start. But unfortunately, we can't even get to that point because the UK government at the moment has shut up shop to ourselves and Scotland. Now, that is not a sensible way forward if we're going to get a Brexit deal that attracts support across the UK.
Well, I've made my point on that. But the EU comprises another 27 member states. With almost all of them, we have a trade deficit. In Germany's case, for example, we have a trade deficit which amounts to £25 billion a year. 1 in 10 of every car made in Germany is exported to the United Kingdom. There is a massive interest in Germany in retaining the maximum possible free trade with Britain. There is a huge deficit in most agricultural products in the UK, and therefore there is, again, a mutuality of interest in maintaining the maximum possible freedom, for example, to export French wine, subject to the lowest possible form of restriction. And therefore, I'm asking the First Minister whether he will take steps, along with his colleagues, to do a tour of the capitals of Europe to talk to the governments of individual member states, because they won't be involved directly in the Brexit negotiating process, in order to see what mutuality of interest we can engender there to help put pressure upon the EU Commission, which is of course unelected, to take the most liberal attitude towards free trade between our respective countries.
Well, first of all, it's been made absolutely clear, and there is no dissent amongst EU 27 about this, that the UK's future arrangement cannot be as beneficial as membership of the EU. You know, for obvious reasons, they take the view you can't have your cake and eat it, to use that phrase. That's the first thing to remember. The European Union is now stronger and more united, probably, than ever it has been. We must be very, very careful that that isn't a unity against the UK, and diplomacy must be used to make sure that that doesn't happen. This is not a negotiation of equals. The EU is 8 times bigger than the UK. Its market's far, far larger. It's far more attractive to foreign investors and exporters than the UK is, because it's got far more consumers than the UK. So we have to come at this from a realistic viewpoint. He makes the point about the EU exporting more to the UK than the UK to the EU in terms of numbers. Well, it'd be odd if it didn't, given the fact it's 8 times bigger. Of course, it's going to export more in terms of money and numbers. But if you look at percentages, actually, we export far more of our exports into the European market than EU products coming into the UK. I think about 8% of the EU's of EU27's exports go into the UK. From Wales' perspective, it's 67% the other way. So actually, as a percentage, we stand to lose far more than Europe does. Bear in mind, of course, the EU has just signed a free trade deal with Japan. The German car manufacturers will eye that very, very greedily, because they will look at a free trade agreement. Japan's a huge opportunity for them in a market that's twice the size of the UK, bluntly, twice the size of the UK. The German car manufacturers have already said that they are, from their perspective, they'd want the UK to stay in. They are not going to press their own government for some kind of special deal for the UK. And the Germans value the EU and its unity more than anything else. I mean, that's been very clear over the course of the past few months. BMW are not a member state of the EU. And that's something we should remember. We are realistic. Mutuality is important. A good deal for all is important. But, of course, we're now faced with a position with a Prime Minister who went into an election with a clear programme of what she wanted to do and lost, or failed to win the election as a result of that. And that's why it's so important that the UK government works with the devolved administrations to get to a position on Brexit that we can all try and support. But so far, the door's been shut.